chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. The attic smelled like dust and old pine, like every apology his father never finished. Ethan Caldwell stood under the single bare bulb, its light shaking in the winter draft, and stared at the hatch above his head like it could swallow him whole. 5 years. 5 years since Richard Caldwell died wealthy enough to buy silence, and somehow still left the good son with nothing but a cardboard box of condolences. And tonight the house was being sold. Tonight the clock downstairs was ticking like a judge. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. But if Ethan was honest, the story didn't start tonight. It started with the way everyone looked at him at the reading of the will. Not angry, not sad, almost amused. Because in the Caldwell family, good had never been a compliment, it was a leash. The lawyer's office had smelled like lemon polish and expensive coffee, bright, clean scents that made Ethan feel like he'd walked in with mud on his shoes. Rain tapped the window in thin, impatient fingers. Somewhere in the hall, a printer whirred like a quiet laugh. Ethan sat straight-backed in a stiff chair, hands folded the way his father liked. He wore the same navy suit he wore to church, to job interviews, to every moment he'd tried to prove he wasn't like the rest of them. Across from him, Mason Caldwell leaned back like the room belonged to him, because it did. Mason's hair was perfect. His smile was easy. His watch caught the fluorescent light and threw it back like a wink. And beside Mason sat Kendra, Richard's second wife, her perfume sharp and sweet, like crushed flowers hiding something rotten. Attorney Stanwyck cleared his throat. "We're here to read the last will and testament of Richard Caldwell." The words landed heavy, like dirt on a coffin. Ethan swallowed. The air tasted like paper. Stanwyck read the usual things first: the beach house in Westport, the investment accounts, the art, the cars, the foundation board seat. Each item was a little punch. Mason's grin widened with every line. Kendra's nails tapped once, twice, 3 times like a countdown. Then Stanwyck looked down, adjusted his glasses, and said, "To my son Ethan I leave nothing." Nothing. The word didn't even echo. It just dropped, like a stone into deep water. Ethan felt his face go hot, then cold. His ears rang. He stared at the lawyer's mouth, waiting for the rest of the sentence. The part where his father explained the joke. But Stanwyck kept going, voice smooth as oil. "To my son Mason, I leave the entirety of my remaining estate." Mason let out a low breath that sounded like a relieved chuckle. Dad always did appreciate loyalty. Ethan's hands unclenched without his permission. His fingers tingled. "Excuse me," Ethan managed, voice thin. "There has to be." Stanwyck lifted a single page. "Your father left a letter. Specifically requested it be read aloud." Ethan's heart flared. A letter meant reasons. A letter meant truth. Stanwyck began. "Ethan, you've always wanted to be the good son, the obedient one, the one who thinks sacrifice equals love. I'm not rewarding that. You'll thank me later." That was it. No "I love you," no explanation, no mercy. Just a cruel little riddle stapled to emptiness. Ethan's throat tightened so hard it hurt to breathe. Kendra's lips curved. "Well, that's decisive." Mason leaned forward, elbows on knees, voice syrupy. "Look at it this way, brother. Now you're free. You can stop pretending you weren't here for the money." Ethan turned toward him. I wasn't. Mason's eyes glittered. Sure. And that sure was the first humiliation loop. The first time Ethan realized being good didn't protect you. It painted a target on your chest. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. And he didn't even know what midnight meant yet. The second humiliation loop came a week later at the funeral. The church smelled like lilies and damp wool. The organ hummed low, like a throat clearing. Ethan stood near the casket, watching strangers cry for a man who had never once said, "I'm proud of you," out loud. Mason moved through the crowd like a politician. Handshakes, warm hugs, laughing softly at the right moments. Ethan stayed still. He didn't know how to perform grief. Near the back, a woman in a black coat whispered loud enough for Ethan to hear, "That's the other son, the one who got cut out." Her friend replied, "What did he do?" And the worst part, Ethan didn't even know the answer. A child dropped a program. Paper slapped the floor. Everyone flinched at the sound like guilt. Kendra approached Ethan after the service, her heels clicking like punctuation. "Richard would have wanted you to move on." Ethan stared at her. "He would have wanted me punished." Kendra smiled the way people smile at a dog they don't trust. "Oh, Ethan, if you were truly good, you wouldn't be asking why." That sentence stayed with him for years. It crawled into his head at night. It whispered when rent was due, when the car broke down, when the bank account dipped into red like a wound. If you were truly good, he had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. But the clock kept ticking and life didn't care. The third humiliation loop didn't happen in a courtroom or a church. It happened at the grocery store. 5 months after the funeral, Ethan stood under buzzing lights, the air smelling like overripe bananas and floor cleaner. He had a basket with bread, eggs, and the cheapest coffee on the bottom shelf. His card declined. Once, twice. The cashier, a teenager with bored eyes, called for a manager. The manager came. And behind the manager, like the universe had a sick sense of humor, stood Mason. Mason wore a tailored coat and carried imported cheese and wine. He looked at Ethan's basket like it was a prop in a play. "Ethan," Mason said, voice loud enough for people to turn. "Wow, this is poetic." Ethan's face burned. The buzzing lights felt like a spotlight. Mason stepped closer, lowered his voice like he was offering kindness. "I could fix this for you. You know that, right?" Ethan's jaw clenched. "I'm fine." Mason's smile sharpened. "No, you're not. You're proud. Dad hated that." Ethan's hands shook as he removed items from the basket one by one. The sound of each product hitting the counter was its own little funeral. Bread, eggs, coffee. Humiliation has a smell, by the way. It smells like cheap disinfectant and stale air and the metallic taste of holding back words you'll regret. Mason leaned in. "There's a seat on the foundation board. You take it, you follow my lead, you stop playing martyr, and I'll make sure you're taken care of." There it was. The temptation villain dressed like a brother. Not just money, identity. "Come back, be like us. Stop being good. Stop trying to earn love, just take." Ethan stared at Mason's watch. It ticked quietly. A private little heartbeat. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. Ethan picked up the single item he could still afford, a pack of instant noodles, and walked out. 5 years passed like that. Not in big dramatic scenes, just small defeats stacked like unpaid bills. Ethan took 2 jobs, delivered packages at dawn, fixed fences on weekends, slept in a rented room that smelled like someone else's cooking. He kept his father's last letter in a drawer like a splinter he couldn't pull out. "You'll thank me later." Later never came, until the call this morning. It was from Leila Gomez, his father's former housekeeper, and the only person in that mansion who had ever looked Ethan in the eye like he mattered. Her voice crackled through the phone, breathless. "Mijo, they're selling the house today, and there's something you never saw." Ethan blinked into the gray morning light, the air cold enough to sting. "What are you talking about?" Leila lowered her voice. "The attic. Richard told me if Ethan ever needs the truth, it's waiting above the beams." I thought he was being dramatic, but last night I heard something, like wood shifting, like a hollow. Ethan's heart thudded hard. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" "I tried," she snapped, lovable, fierce, impatient. "You disappeared. You were too busy being strong. Come now, before it's gone. Before it's gone." Ethan drove to the Caldwell house with his hands tight on the wheel. The mansion rose behind iron gates like a cold memory. Inside, it smelled like old money and furniture that never got sat on. And now, here he was, standing under the attic hatch, bare bulbs swinging, dust floating like tiny ghosts. Downstairs, the grandfather clock ticked. 11:12 p.m. The buyer's agent had given him until midnight to take anything personal. After that, the keys were done. The house wasn't his anymore. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. Ethan pulled the cord to the attic ladder. The wood groaned. Something shifted above him, soft, like a box sliding. And for the first time in 5 years, Ethan felt something that wasn't shame, curiosity, hope, fear. Because whatever his father left in the dark was about to change everything. And Ethan didn't know if he was ready to be the person who found it. The ladder fully opens, and something up there is already waiting. The ladder fully opens, and something up there is already waiting. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. The ladder dropped the rest of the way with a heavy thud, and a breath of air rolled down from the attic. Stale heat mixed with cedar, mouse-dry insulation, and something faintly sweet, like old cologne trapped in wood. Dust glittered in the bare bulb's wobbling light, turning the air into a slow snowstorm. Ethan put one hand on the first rung. It creaked like a warning. Below him, the house was too quiet. Even the walls felt like they were holding their breath. 11:14 p.m. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. He climbed. Each rung complained under his weight, each step stirring more dust until it clung to his lips and tasted like pennies. At the top, he pushed the hatch open and the attic spilled into view, rafters like ribs, boxes stacked like secrets, spider webs stretched tight like thin white thread. And then he saw it. A suitcase. Not a cardboard box. Not a plastic bin. A leather suitcase, dark and scuffed, sitting dead center on a strip of plywood like someone had placed it there on purpose. Like it had been waiting for him. Ethan's pulse jumped. He reached for it, fingers trembling, a sound cut through the stillness. A weak, frantic thump. Then a muffled, panicked whine. Ethan froze. He tilted his head. Another thump closer, under his feet. Not in the attic, downstairs. His stomach dropped. He hurried back down the ladder, boots slipping on the worn rungs. His palms scraped wood. Pain flared sharp. He didn't care. He hit the floor and sprinted down the hallway, the air colder here, smelling faintly of lemon cleaner and abandoned rooms. The sound came again, clearer now, a scraping, a small body skidding against wood, nails. Ethan rushed into the study, his father's study. The room smelled like leather chairs and cigar ghosts. Moonlight cut in through tall windows, painting the desk in pale bars. And in the corner, by the old vent near the baseboard, a dog. Small, shaggy, white fur matted with dust. Its ribs rose and fell fast like a trapped bird. One paw was caught in a snapped metal grate, pinning it to the wall. The dog's eyes were wide, wet marbles of terror. It wasn't barking. It was trying not to, like it knew sound would bring trouble. Ethan's breath caught. Hey, it's okay." The dog flinched at his voice and tried to pull away, yelping soft, strained. Ethan knelt slowly. He could smell the dog now, damp fur, old carpet, a sour edge of fear. The vent grate was bent inward, the metal biting into the dog's paw. "Easy," Ethan whispered. His hands hovered. "I'm gonna help you." The dog's eyes tracked him, suspicious but desperate. Ethan tried to lift the grate. It wouldn't budge. He pressed again. The metal squealed high and ugly, and the dog whined louder. Ethan swallowed hard. The sound felt like it might wake the whole house, or worse, someone else. Because suddenly he remembered this house wasn't empty. There were realtors, movers, a buyer's agent who'd been pacing downstairs earlier with her clipboard and her too bright smile. And somewhere out there, Mason. Always Mason. Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket like a hornet. He ignored it. He scanned the study, the desk, the bookshelf, tools, anything. His eyes landed on an old brass letter opener on the desk, thin, sharp, ornate. His father's taste, pretty weapons. Ethan grabbed it and slid it under the bent seam of metal. He pried gently. The dog trembled so hard its collar tags jingled faintly. The jingle made Ethan pause. Collar tags. Ethan squinted. The tag was dusty, but he could make out a name stamped into it. "Pickles," he blinked. "Pickles." A laugh almost escaped, tiny, disbelieving. The name was so absurd in this haunted mansion, like a crack of sunlight in a funeral. The dog Pickles licked Ethan's knuckles, trembling. "Okay, Pickles," Ethan breathed. "We'll get you out. Just hold still." He pried again. The metal shifted a fraction, scraping the baseboard. Pickles yelped, then went quiet, panting. Ethan's throat tightened with panic. Hey, look at me." Ethan leaned close. "You're okay. You're okay." Pickles' eyes locked onto his, and something in Ethan's chest pulled tight like a rope. A caregiving instinct he hadn't used in years surged awake. Because in the last 5 years, Ethan had been taking care of himself so hard he'd forgotten how to care for anything else. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. And now he was spending it trying to free a dog with a ridiculous name. Ethan tried a different angle, bracing his shoulder against the wall and pulling the grate outward while he pried with the opener. The metal squealed again, loud. From downstairs a voice called, sharp and impatient. "Hello, Mr. Caldwell, are you still here?" The buyer's agent. Ethan's blood turned cold. Pickles whined, panic rising. Ethan whispered fast, "SHH, please, Footsteps below, approaching the hall. Ethan's hands shook. He pried harder, the letter opener bent. "Come on," Ethan hissed through clenched teeth. The grate shifted another inch. Pickles' paw slid slightly, almost free. Another step outside the study. The agent's heels clicked like a metronome. Ethan looked around wildly. If she saw the dog, she'd ask questions. Animal control. Delay. Noise. Attention. Attention was the last thing Ethan needed tonight. Because attention in this family was never neutral. It was a spotlight. A weapon. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. "Mr. Caldwell," the agent called again, closer. Ethan made a decision so fast it felt like instinct. He shrugged off his suit jacket and tossed it over Pickles' head and body like a blanket, muffling any sound. Pickles squirmed under it, confused but quieter. Ethan leaned down and whispered, "I'm sorry. I know, just trust me." He jammed the letter opener back under the grate and pulled with everything he had. Metal groaned, wood cracked, and finally the grate popped loose. Pickles' paw slipped free. Pickles exploded out from under the jacket in a blur of white fur and fear, skidding across the study floor, straight toward the door. Ethan lunged. Pickles, no, too late. Pickles shot into the hallway. And at the exact same moment the buyer's agent stepped into view. She screamed. Pickles bolted down the hall toward the stairs, nails clattering like hail. The agent jumped back, clutching her chest, clipboard flying. Ethan froze for half a second, then ran after the dog. "Pickles," he called, trying to keep his voice low, which was impossible now. "Pickles, come here." Pickles hit the top stair, slipped and tumbled, thump, 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 down 3 steps before catching itself, yelping. Ethan's stomach flipped. He sprinted down after it, heart pounding like a drum. The house suddenly felt alive, full of movement and echoes. Pickles raced through the foyer, past the chandelier, straight toward the front door. Ethan lunged for the collar. Pickles twisted away. And then the front door swung open. Cold night air rushed in, smelling like wet asphalt and winter grass. And in the doorway stood Mason. Perfect coat, perfect hair, perfect timing. Mason looked down at the dog, then up at Ethan, and smiled like he'd just found a new lever to pull. "Well, well," Mason said softly. "Still rescuing strays, huh?" Ethan's breath came hard. "What are you doing here?" Mason's gaze flicked past him into the house. "Buyer's agent called. Said you were making a scene. Thought I'd come check on my little brother." Pickles trembled beside Ethan, torn between bolting and hiding. Its paw, now free, was bleeding a thin line onto the marble tile. Mason noticed. His smile sharpened. "You know," Mason said, voice honeyed, "Dad would have hated this. Blood on the floor." Ethan's fists clenched. "Back off." Mason stepped inside anyway, slow and casual, like he owned the air. He crouched slightly, extending a hand toward Pickles. Pickles flinched away, pressing into Ethan's leg. Mason chuckled. "Smart dog." The buyer's agent hovered behind Mason, pale and furious. Is that your dog?" Ethan swallowed. "No." Mason lifted his brows, pretending to think. Actually, his eyes gleamed. "It might be." Ethan stared at him. "What?" Mason stood, brushing off invisible dust. "Dad had a dog the last year, didn't you know?" "Of course you didn't, you weren't around." He sighed theatrically. "He called it Pickles, ridiculous, but Dad was sentimental toward the end." Ethan's mouth went dry. Richard had a dog. Mason's eyes held his with cruel delight. Yeah, and guess what, Ethan? If it's Dad's dog, it's mine now, like everything else. Pickles whined, low and scared, pressing harder into Ethan. Ethan felt something hot and protective surge through him, an anger so clean it surprised him. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight, and Mason was about to take even this. Mason leaned closer, voice dropping. Hand him over, be good, like always. There it was again, the leash, the old identity, be good, obey, surrender. Ethan looked down at Pickles. The dog's fur smelled like dust and fear and something stubbornly alive. Its eyes begged without words. Ethan pictured the suitcase in the attic waiting. He pictured the clock, 11:22 p.m. He pictured Mason's hands on anything Ethan loved, turning it into a possession. Ethan straightened. No, Ethan said. Mason's smile faltered just for a heartbeat. Ethan's voice got steadier. He's hurt. I'm taking him to a vet. Mason laughed, but it sounded thin now. With what money? Ethan met his gaze. With whatever I have. The buyer's agent stepped forward. Mr. Caldwell, you can't just... Ethan cut her off, eyes still on Mason. I have until midnight. I'm still on the deed until then. Mason's eyes narrowed. You're bluffing. Ethan didn't answer. He scooped Pickles up carefully. The dog weighed less than he expected, too light, like it hadn't been fed right. It trembled in his arms, but it didn't fight. It tucked its head under Ethan's chin like it had chosen him. That choice hit Ethan harder than it should have. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. Mason took a step closer, blocking the door. Ethan, don't do this. Don't make me the bad guy. Ethan's laugh came out rough. You do that just fine on your own. Mason's eyes flashed. For a second the mask slipped, old jealousy, old rage. Then it smoothed again. Fine, Mason said softly. Go play hero, but when you come back, that attic better be empty. Because everything in this house becomes mine at midnight, including whatever truth you think you're hunting. Ethan's chest tightened. Mason knew, or at least Mason suspected. And that meant the suitcase wasn't just a keepsake, it was a threat. A secret powerful enough that Mason wanted to control it. Ethan pushed past him, shoulder brushing Mason's coat. Mason smelled like expensive cologne and cold entitlement. Outside, the night air hit Ethan's face like a slap. The sky was ink dark. The driveway glistened wet under the porch light. Pickles shivered in Ethan's arms, bleeding onto his shirt. Ethan jogged to his car, heart hammering. As he fumbled for the keys, his phone buzzed again. He glanced down. One new voicemail from an unknown number. The transcribed preview flashed on screen. Ethan, it's Leila. Listen to me. The attic, he hid it inside the message cut off. Ethan's breath caught. He looked back at the house. In an upstairs window, a light clicked on. In the attic, someone was up there. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. And now he wasn't the only one racing the clock. Ethan must choose. Vet for Pickles or sprint back inside while someone is in the attic. Ethan's hands hovered over the steering wheel, knuckles white, as Pickles trembled in his lap. The dog's fur was warm and damp under Ethan's palm, and every shallow breath came with a tiny, wet whistle. Blood dotted Ethan's shirt like punctuation marks he didn't remember writing. Upstairs, the attic light burned. Someone moved behind the window, just a shadow crossing, then gone. Ethan's stomach twisted. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight, but he also had a dog bleeding in his lap. A stupid, perfect crisis. The kind of caregiving chaos that didn't ask if you were ready. It just happened. Pickles whimpered, small, exhausted. Ethan made the decision he always made when someone vulnerable needed him. He turned the key. The engine coughed to life, and the headlights washed the wet driveway in harsh white. The smell of gasoline and cold rain filled the car. Ethan backed out fast, tires spitting gravel, eyes flicking up to the attic window one last time. The shadow was still there, waiting, watching. Then Ethan was gone, racing down slick streets under orange streetlights that smeared in the rain like tears. The closest emergency vet was 20 minutes away if the roads were kind. Tonight, the roads weren't kind. A semi roared past and shook Ethan's car. Wind slapped the windshield. The wipers squeaked in frantic arcs. Pickles shivered and pressed its head into Ethan's elbow like it was trying to disappear inside him. "It's okay," Ethan said, voice tight. "Just stay with me, please." Pickles' breathing hitched. Ethan's chest tightened with a panic he couldn't swallow, because the truth was Ethan didn't know how to lose anything else. Not after losing his father the way he did. Not after losing his place in a family like a seat at the table could be revoked. And now, this tiny creature had crawled into the center of his night and made itself his responsibility. His heart beat hard enough to hurt. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. The dashboard clock read 11:31 p.m. He pressed harder on the gas. The vet clinic smelled like bleach, wet fur, and burnt coffee. Harsh fluorescent lights made everything look too real. A woman behind the front desk looked up, eyes tired but alert. Ethan burst in with Pickles in his arms. "He's hurt his paw, he was trapped, please." Pickles gave a weak whine that cracked something open inside Ethan. A vet tech appeared instantly, wearing teal scrubs and a calm face. "We've got him." Ethan didn't want to let go. Pickles' eyes locked on his as the tech lifted him away, wide, pleading. Ethan's throat tightened. "I'm right here," Ethan whispered, as if the dog could understand English. "I'm right here." The tech paused, glanced at the bleeding paw. "Did you do this?" Ethan flinched. "No, he was stuck in a vent grate in my father's house. It snapped." The tech nodded, not accusing anymore, just moving. "Okay, we're going to take him back. Fill this out." Paperwork slid across the counter like another test. Ethan grabbed the pen, hand shaking. The form asked for the dog's owner information. Owner. He stared at the word like it was a dare. He wrote, Ethan Caldwell, phone number. Address. His address felt like a lie, just a rented room, but he wrote it anyway. Then it asked for the dog's name. He wrote Pickles. His signature looked crooked, like a man signing something too heavy. The receptionist glanced at the form, then at him. "Deposit is $200. Ethan's stomach sank. He swallowed. Can I pay after?" The receptionist's face softened a fraction. "We can't start treatment without payment." Ethan's mind raced. 200. He had maybe 80 in checking. He could overdraft, but his phone buzzed again in his pocket like it had teeth. He pulled it out. A text from Mason. 11:34 p.m. Attics open. Clocks ticking. Be good. Ethan's skin went cold. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. The receptionist's voice cut through his spiraling. "Sir," Ethan looked up, desperate. "Please, he's suffering." A voice behind Ethan said, "I'll cover it." Ethan turned. Leila Gomez stood there in a rain-soaked cardigan, hair frizzed from the storm, eyes blazing like she'd sprinted through fire to get here. She smelled like wet wool and Vicks Vapo Rub, comfort and urgency. Ethan blinked. "Leila, how?" "I have a car," she snapped, already pulling her wallet out. "And a brain. You left your phone on silent for 5 years, but you still have habits. You always run toward pain. I knew where you'd go." She slapped her card on the counter. "Do it." The receptionist nodded and typed fast. Ethan's chest squeezed with something like relief and shame. "Lila, I can't." "Yes, you can," she said, cutting him off. "You can let people help you, Mijo. That's the lesson you keep refusing." The words landed like a gentle punch. The tech disappeared with Pickles through swinging doors. Ethan swallowed. "The attic light, someone's up there." Leela's eyes sharpened. "I know." Ethan stared at her. "You knew and you still." Leela stepped closer, voice low. "You saved the dog, good. Now save yourself." He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. Leela grabbed Ethan's wrist and pulled him toward the chairs. "Sit. Breathe. We need your head clear." Ethan sat, legs bouncing. The waiting room was quiet except for the hum of vending machines and the distant bark of someone else's emergency. A TV played a muted cooking show, bright colors mocking the sterile reality. Layla leaned in. "Listen carefully. Richard, he wasn't a good man, but he was a complicated one. He told me to tell you something if you ever came back." Ethan's heart hammered. "What?" Leela's voice softened, almost reluctant. "He said Ethan thinks being good will save him. It won't. Only the truth will. Tell him to look where the house breathes." Ethan frowned. "Where the house breathes," Leela nodded. "Vents, attics, hollow beams. Places air moves." Ethan's mind flashed to Pickles trapped in that vent grate, like the house had been trying to speak. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. A door opened and the tech returned. "Pickles has a deep cut but no fracture. We're cleaning it and stitching. He'll be okay." Ethan's chest loosened like someone had untied a knot inside him. "Thank God." The tech hesitated. "He's very attached to you. He calmed down when we brought your scent in." Ethan swallowed. "My scent?" The tech nodded. "He kept shaking until we laid your jacket near him. Then he relaxed, like he trusts you." Ethan looked down at his hands, still dusty from the attic, still smelling faintly of cedar and old house. Trust, the word hit harder than inheritance. Leela stood. "Now we go." Ethan's phone buzzed again. Another text from Mason, 11:41 p.m. Found the suitcase. Cute. It's locked. Ethan's blood turned to ice. He stood so fast the chair scraped. Layla read his face. "He's in the attic." Ethan nodded. "He's in the attic." Leela's jaw tightened. "Then we have 9 minutes to beat a thief who thinks he owns the world." Ethan stared at the clinic doors. "Pickles," the tech said, "we're finishing stitches. You can pick him up in 15. Ethan's stomach twisted. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. 15 minutes he didn't have. Leela touched his arm, surprising gentleness. "Pickles will be safe here. Truth won't. Choose." Ethan closed his eyes for half a second. In the dark, he saw the attic window again. The shadow, Mason. He opened his eyes. "We go," Ethan said. They drove like the night itself was pushing them. Leela navigated, pointing sharply, barking shortcuts. Her voice had the bite of someone who'd spent a lifetime keeping rich people's chaos from burning down houses. As they pulled into the driveway, the Caldwell mansion looked different. Not like a memory, like a crime scene. The front door was cracked open. A slice of warm light spilled onto the wet porch. Ethan's heart slammed. He didn't even close it. Leela's expression was fierce. He never closes doors. He thinks consequences don't exist. They stepped inside. The house smelled like stirred-up dust now, like someone had kicked secrets awake. Footsteps echoed faintly above, slow, deliberate, as if whoever was upstairs wasn't rushing. Mason wasn't racing the clock. He was enjoying it. Ethan moved fast, shoes sliding on polished wood. Leela followed, surprisingly quiet. The grandfather clock loomed at the end of the hallway, tall and smug. Its pendulum swung like a slow blade. 11:49 p.m. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. Ethan climbed the attic ladder again, muscles tight, breath shallow. Leela stayed below, whispering, "If he tries to come down, I block him. Go." Ethan pushed the hatch up. The attic air hit his face, hotter now, stirred, smelling of sweat and disturbed insulation. The suitcase was still there, but it had been moved. Scuff marks in the dust showed it had been dragged toward the far beam line where the roof dipped low. And crouched near it, back turned, was Mason. He had the suitcase open, not fully, just pried at the seams like a crow trying to crack a shell. Mason held a small flashlight in his teeth. Its beam jittered across old trunk stickers and faded initials. R.C. Mason's shoulders tensed as if he sensed Ethan's presence. Then Mason turned slowly, smiling around the flashlight like a predator caught mid-bite. "Well," Mason said, voice muffled by the light, "look who finally showed up." Ethan's throat was dry. "Get away from that." Mason popped the flashlight out and pointed it right at Ethan's eyes, blinding him. "Or what? You'll be good at me." Ethan blinked through the glare. "What's in the suitcase?" Mason chuckled, tapping the lock with a knuckle. "Something Dad didn't want you to have, so naturally I want it." Ethan stepped forward. The boards creaked under his weight. Mason's smile tightened. "Careful, these floors are old. Would be a shame if you fell." Ethan's skin prickled. Because there, right beside the suitcase, was a loose plank, one that looked freshly disturbed. Like someone had opened the attic not just to hide a suitcase, but to hide something under the floor, truth breadcrumbs. Ethan's eyes flicked to the plank. Mason noticed. His gaze followed, and his smile widened. "Oh," Mason said softly, "you see it too." He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. Mason rose, slow and confident, and placed one polished shoe directly on the loose plank, pinning it. "You want to know what Dad left you, Ethan?" Mason said, voice low. "It's right under my foot." The grandfather clock downstairs struck once, a warning chime. 11:52 p.m. Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. Leela called from below, urgent whisper. "Ethan, someone's here. I heard a car." Mason's eyes gleamed. "We have company." Ethan's mind raced. Buyer's agent, police. Someone Mason called, or someone his father feared. Mason leaned in, almost tender. Last chance, brother. Walk away. Let midnight happen. Stay good. Ethan stared at Mason's shoe pinning the plank. He stared at the suitcase lock. He stared at the dust pattern, like fingerprints of a dead man trying to be heard. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. Ethan took one step closer, and Mason's hand slipped into his coat pocket. Something metallic glinted. A key. Or something sharper. A car door slams outside. Mason reveals what's in his pocket as the clock races toward midnight. In the attic, the air felt thinner. Hot insulation breath and old cedar pressing in. The flashlight beam in Mason's hand stabbed Ethan's eyes, turning the world into white pain and dark afterimages. Outside, a car door slammed. Hard. Not a casual arrival, a statement. Leela's whisper floated up from below, tight with fear. Ethan, someone's at the front, more than one. Mason's smile didn't move, but his eyes did. They flicked to the attic hatch like he could already taste the chaos downstairs. Perfect, he murmured. Witnesses. Ethan blinked through the glare. What's in your pocket, Mason? Mason withdrew his hand slowly, like a magician savoring a trick. A small silver lighter, and a narrow metal tool, flat, sharp, the kind used to pry locks. He tapped the lighter against the suitcase as if it was a drum. Click, click. You want the truth, Mason said softly. Truth burns easy. Ethan's stomach turned cold. The suitcase wasn't just a box anymore. It was oxygen. Mason leaned down, placing the lighter near the cracked seam he'd already forced. You rush me, I set it on fire. And then you'll be right back where you belong, empty. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. Downstairs, voices rose, muffled but urgent. A woman's higher pitch. A man's calm baritone. Another voice, official, clipped. Mason's eyes gleamed. Hear that? That's the world coming to put you back in your place. Ethan's gaze snapped to the loose plank under Mason's shoe. The dust around it was disturbed in a clean rectangle, like someone had opened it recently and closed it carefully. His father's fingerprints in the dark. Ethan took a slow step forward, palms out. Don't, please, Mason chuckled. There you are, begging the good son. Ethan's jaw tightened. You're not doing this for Dad. Mason's grin sharpened. No. I'm doing it because you still think you deserve something for being nice. He brought the lighter closer. Click. A small blue flame appeared. It hissed quietly, hungry. Ethan's body moved before his brain finished the thought. He lunged. Mason jerked back, flame dancing, and the lighter dropped, clattering on the plywood. The flame licked the edge of a dusty old sticker on the suitcase and caught for a heartbeat. Ethan slapped it out with his bare hand. Heat bit his palm, sharp, shocking, then the smell hit him. Singed paper and burnt glue, the scent of something almost lost. Mason swore and swung the flashlight like a club. Ethan ducked. The beam smashed into a rafter with a hollow thunk. Dust exploded down in a choking cloud. They grappled, boots scraping, shoulders hitting beams, the attic groaning beneath them like it hated conflict. Mason shoved Ethan backward. Ethan's heel hit the loose plank. The board shifted. A deep, sickening crack rippled through the floor. Both men froze, breath heaving. Mason looked down. His shoe slid a fraction. His confident smile flickered just for a blink, and in that blink Ethan saw it, fear. Because the plank wasn't just loose. It was covering a cut-out section, a hidden cavity between joists, and now it was opening. Ethan's heart punched his ribs. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. Mason reacted first. He dropped to one knee and jammed his hand into the gap, trying to keep it shut like you can hold a secret down with your palm. Ethan dropped too, fingers scrambling at the edge. They tugged like two men fighting over the same breath. Mason hissed, "Let it go." Ethan gritted, "No." The board tore free with a sharp rip. A rush of colder air rose from the cavity, smelling like dry paper and old metal. Inside was a small lockbox, black heavy, the size of a shoebox, wrapped in a faded towel, and on top of it a photo. Ethan's father, younger, arm around a woman Ethan didn't recognize. Her smile was tired but real, and in her arms was a baby with Ethan's eyes. Ethan's throat closed. Mason snatched for the lockbox. Ethan yanked it away. Mason's elbow slammed into a beam and he cursed, pain flashing hot across his face. "Give it," Mason growled, voice breaking for the first time. "It's mine." Ethan clutched the lockbox to his chest. "It's not." Mason's gaze flicked to Ethan's pocket like he was suddenly remembering something. The dog's tag, Pickles. Mason's mouth curved again, mean and quick. "You can't open it." Ethan's hand went to his pocket without thinking, and there it was. A small brass tag he'd unconsciously pocketed earlier when Pickles had pressed into him, the second tag behind the name plate. He hadn't noticed the tiny stamped numbers until now. Not numbers, a key code. And attached to it, hidden under the tag, taped flat, was a thin brass key. Ethan's breath caught. Leela's words echoed, "Look where the house breathes." Pickles had been trapped by the vent. Pickles had been the breadcrumb. Ethan stared at the key in his palm, trembling. "Oh my God!" Mason's eyes widened, furious. "No, no!" Ethan jammed the key into the lockbox. It turned with a soft, satisfying click. That sound, small, clean, felt like the universe finally choosing a side. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. Downstairs, Leela's voice rose, loud now, protective. "You can't go up there, he's still legally here," a man replied, calm and official. "Ma'am, step aside." Another voice, smooth, familiar, cut in. "Ethan, this is getting out of hand." Stanwyck, the attorney, and the sharper woman's voice. "I told you he'd do something crazy." Kendra, Mason's lips peeled back. "They're here, they'll see you stealing." Ethan's hands shook as he opened the lockbox. Inside, a thick envelope stamped with a notary seal, a silver USB drive, and a small cassette recorder, old school, heavy, deliberate. On top of it all, a folded note in his father's handwriting. "If you're reading this, you chose to save what needed saving first." Ethan's eyes stung. Then another line underlined. "Play the recording before midnight, in front of Stanwyck." Ethan's gaze snapped to the attic hatch. The grandfather clock downstairs chimed again, one low, heavy note. 11:56 p.m. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. Mason lunged, grabbing for the USB. Ethan jerked back and Mason's hand caught Ethan's burned palm. Pain flared, white-hot. Ethan nearly dropped everything. Mason hissed, "You don't get to win." Ethan forced the words out through his teeth. "Maybe I'm not trying to win." Mason froze. "What?" Ethan's voice shook, but it was honest. Maybe I'm trying to understand why Dad did this. That landed like a slap, because Mason didn't care about understanding. He only cared about control. Mason's face twisted. He did it because you're weak. Ethan held up the recorder. Then why leave me this? Mason's nostrils flared. For a heartbeat he looked cornered. Then he did something worse than anger. He went soft. Temptation wearing a brother's face. Ethan, Mason said gently, stepping closer, palms open. Listen, whatever Dad hid, it's going to destroy the family. You play that recording and you burn everything down. Is that what you want? Ethan's throat tightened. Because part of him, old Ethan, wanted peace more than truth, wanted to keep everyone comfortable, wanted to be good. Mason leaned in, voice a whisper that smelled like expensive cologne and rot. Give it to me. We can talk. We can split something. You can finally stop struggling. Ethan's mind flashed to Pickles trembling, bleeding, choosing him anyway. To Layla sprinting into a vet clinic with rain in her hair, saying, "Let people help you." To the photo of a woman holding baby Ethan with his eyes. Ethan's chest rose with a shaking breath. "I'm done being good," Ethan said quietly. Mason's expression hardened instantly. Mask gone. "You'll regret that." Ethan turned and shoved the recorder and envelope into his jacket, gripping the USB like it was a heartbeat. He climbed down the ladder fast. Leela looked up, eyes wild. "You got it." Ethan nodded once. "Stanwyk's here." The foyer was crowded. Buyer's agent pale and angry, Kendra standing stiff like a statue, Stanwyk in his coat with his briefcase, and a uniformed deputy with a hand resting near his belt. Kendra's perfume cut through the air, sweet poison. Mason descended behind Ethan, smoothing his hair like he hadn't just tried to burn the truth. Kendra snapped, pointing. "There." He broke into the attic. "He's stealing property." The deputy stepped forward. "Sir, I'm going to need you to." Stanwyk's eyes landed on the notary-sealed envelope peeking from Ethan's jacket. His face changed, subtle but real. "Ethan," Stanwyk said carefully. "Where did you get that?" Ethan's voice came out rough. "My father hid it. He told me to play the recording in front of you before midnight." The grandfather clock ticked loud in the sudden silence. 11:58 p.m. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. Mason laughed too loudly. "This is pathetic. He's staging a little drama." Ethan looked at Stanwyk. "You read his letter to me 5 years ago. You heard him say, 'You'll thank me later.'" Stanwyk swallowed, eyes flicking to Kendra, then Mason. "Yes." Ethan held up the recorder. His burned palm stung. He didn't flinch. "Then let him finish," Ethan said. Kendra's voice sharpened. "Stanwyk, don't indulge this." But Stanwyk lifted a hand, quiet authority. "If there's a notarized document, I'm obligated." The deputy looked uncertain. The buyer's agent stared, breath caught. Leela moved subtly to Ethan's side, like a shield made of bones and love. Ethan set the recorder on the entryway table. His fingers shook as he pressed play. A click, a whir. Then his father's voice filled the foyer, older, tired, unmistakable. "If you're hearing this, Ethan, you made the right choice. And Mason, you're probably standing there pretending this is yours." Mason's face drained. Kendra's lips parted. The house held its breath. The clock kept ticking. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. Richard's recorded confession begins naming names, right as midnight approaches, with the deputy listening. The recorder's tiny speaker crackled, and Richard Caldwell's voice, older, rougher, stripped of boardrooms and bravado, filled the foyer like a ghost that refused to be polite. "If you're hearing this, Ethan, you made the right choice. And Mason, you're probably standing there pretending this is yours." Mason's jaw tightened so hard a muscle jumped near his cheek. Kendra's perfume seemed sharper now, like flowers left too long in a vase. Stanwicks' face went pale, eyes fixed on the recorder as if it could bite. The deputy shifted his weight, hand still near his belt, suddenly paying attention in a different way. No longer just family drama, but evidence. The grandfather clock's pendulum swung with calm cruelty. 11:59 p.m. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. Richard continued, voice steadying as if he'd rehearsed the truth until it stopped hurting. "I am recording this because a will can be manipulated, a signature can be forged, and my silence has already cost Ethan too much." Ethan's throat tightened. His burned palm throbbed around the edge of the table. Leela stood beside him, close enough that he could smell her rain-wet cardigan, close enough to feel her steady courage like warmth. Richard's voice dropped lower. "Kendra, if you're there, don't bother denying it. You were careful. You always were, but you made one mistake." Kendra's chin lifted like a queen refusing a verdict. "This is insane." Stanwick held up a hand, eyes still locked on the tape. "Please." Richard's voice grew sharper. "You thought I didn't know you were siphoning money from the foundation. You thought I didn't know you used Mason as your mouthpiece and your shield." Mason barked a laugh, thin and brittle. "What?" The tape kept going. "And you thought I didn't know about the medication." Silence hit the foyer like a thrown glass. Ethan's stomach turned. "Medication," Richard exhaled on the recording, an ugly, tired sound. "I let myself be sedated, not because I was weak, because it was easier than fighting you every day, and because I needed you to believe you were winning." Kendra's voice sliced in loud. "He was sick. He was confused." Richard's voice steady. "I wasn't confused when I changed the attic vent grate myself. I wasn't confused when I hid the lockbox under the beam. I wasn't confused when I bought the dog." Ethan's breath caught. "Pickles." Richard continued, softer now, almost ashamed. "I bought Pickles because I needed a living thing in the house that still had an honest instinct, a creature that would cling to the person who actually showed up with care." Ethan's eyes stung. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. Richard's voice turned to a confession that sounded like it hurt him to speak. "Ethan, I cut you out on paper because I needed you to disappear. I needed you safe. You were the only one who wouldn't play their game, so I made you the villain in public and the survivor in private." Ethan's knees threatened to buckle. Mason's face twisted. No, that's not." Richard didn't pause. "Mason, you've spent your life mistaking attention for love. Kendra fed that. She taught you that winning means someone else must lose." Mason's eyes flashed. "Shut it off." Kendra lunged toward the recorder. The deputy stepped forward instantly. "Ma'am, don't." Kendra froze, breathing hard, hands clenched. Her composure cracked just enough to show the panic underneath. Stanwick's voice was tight. "Let it play." Richard's tape clicked faintly like a heartbeat. "I'm not proud of how I raised you, Mason," Richard said. "I taught you to perform. I taught you to charm. I taught you to take. And when Ethan chose to be different, I punished him for it because I was jealous." Ethan flinched. Jealous. Richard continued, and for the first time his voice shook. "I was jealous because Ethan could be good without applause. Because he could be kind when no one was watching. Because he didn't need to win to feel real." Ethan's vision blurred, foyer lights smearing into soft halos. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. Richard's voice steadied, becoming practical again, like a man forcing himself back into control. "In the lockbox there is a notarized document. It voids the previous will if the attached evidence is presented. There is also a USB drive containing bank records, email threads, and video footage from cameras Kendra didn't know about." Stanwyck's breath caught audibly. The deputy's posture changed, spine straighter, face intent. Kendra's lips parted, but no sound came out. Mason whispered almost to himself, "Dad, no." Richard's tone turned cold. "If you play this tape, Ethan, you must do it before midnight, before the house transfers. Because after midnight, Mason will claim the contents were planted. He'll bury it in lawyers and delays and doubt. The clock matters. The moment matters." Ethan's chest squeezed. The clock mattered. The entire night had been engineered. Every breadcrumb, every cruel delay, every test of his instincts. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. The tape hissed, then Richard's voice softened. "I'm sorry. For the grocery store humiliation you never told me about. I'm sorry for making you beg for dignity. I thought pain would turn you into steel, but pain just made you lonely." Ethan's breath broke. Leela reached over and squeezed his wrist firm, grounding. Richard continued, "You weren't left with nothing, Ethan. You were left with a choice. And if you're hearing this, you chose care first." Ethan swallowed hard. The tape clicked as Richard reached the end. "Ethan, you have one last chance before the grandfather clock strikes midnight." The recorder stopped. The whole house went silent except for the pendulum swinging. Then the grandfather clock began to chime. 12 deep notes, each one a heavy footstep. Midnight. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight, and he'd made it. For a second, no one moved. Then Kendra's voice snapped back into her body, cold, sharp, desperate. "This is fabrication, a dying man's paranoia." Stanwyck's hands trembled as he reached for the notary-sealed envelope. "Ethan, may I?" Ethan nodded once and pulled it free, the paper edges scraping his burned palm. Stanwyck opened it with careful fingers like it was a bomb. He scanned the first page. His face tightened. He scanned the signatures. His throat bobbed. Then he looked up at the deputy. "This is a codicil, notarized. It supersedes the prior will, contingent upon corroborating evidence." Mason's voice rose, cracked with rage. "You can't just—" Stanwyck cut him off, for once not smooth. "Yes, we can." Ethan pulled the USB from his jacket, holding it between two fingers like it might be too heavy to exist. The buyer's agent, still standing awkwardly near the door, whispered, "Oh my God," Leela hissed under her breath, "plug it in." Ethan looked around. His father's study was still there down the hall. The old desktop computer, the one Richard refused to replace because he liked the familiar click of the keys. Ethan moved fast, the whole room spinning with adrenaline. Mason followed, voice rising. "Ethan, don't do this." Ethan didn't look back. He walked into the study, the smell of leather and cigar ghosts hitting him like a memory. The desk lamp cast a warm circle of light, softer than the foyer's glare. Ethan plugged in the USB. The computer whirred awake, fan groaning. The screen lit up blue-white and files populated instantly, organized, labeled, dated. Ethan's pulse hammered. Stanwyck leaned in, eyes wide. "This is detailed." The deputy stepped closer. "Ma'am, sir, I'm going to need everyone to remain calm." Kendra's heels clicked sharply as she entered, voice tight. "You can't access private financial," Stanwyck said. "It's evidence named in a notarized document." Mason shoved past Kendra, eyes wild. "This is theft." He broke in. Ethan clicked the camera footage file. A video opened. Grainy black and white. The attic. A timestamp from years ago. The footage showed Kendra in the attic, lifting the suitcase, rummaging, then placing the lockbox under the plank. It showed her calling someone, holding a phone to her ear, her mouth moving. Then Mason climbed up. Younger, smug, listening. The two of them stood over the cavity like conspirators at a grave. Mason's voice in the study turned hoarse. "That's not what it looks like." But it was exactly what it looked like. The deputy stared at the screen, face hardening into official purpose. "Ma'am," Kendra stepped back, breath quickening. "This is edited." Stanwyck clicked another file, emails, bank transfers, foundation entries, numbers, dates, a pattern. Mason's hands shook. "Dad wouldn't record." Ethan finally turned to him. And in that moment, Mason didn't look powerful. He looked like a boy caught stealing. Ethan's voice was quiet. "He recorded because you never stop." Mason's face twisted. "You think you're better than me?" Ethan swallowed. "The answer used to be complicated. Now it wasn't." "I think you're hungry," Ethan said. "And you keep trying to eat everything so you don't have to feel empty." Mason flinched like Ethan had slapped him. Kendra snapped, "Don't psychoanalyze him." The deputy held up a hand. "Ma'am, you're under investigation. I'm going to ask you to step into the foyer with me." Kendra's eyes darted, calculating exits, angles, lies. She looked at Mason, seeking backup. Mason's throat worked. He didn't move. Because for the first time in his life he couldn't charm the truth. Kendra's voice broke. "Richard promised me," Stanwyck said, flat. "Richard promised you nothing. You took." The deputy guided Kendra toward the door. Kendra's perfume trailed behind like a last, poisonous ribbon. The house exhaled. When the voices faded, the study felt too quiet. Ethan stared at the computer screen. The evidence, the years, the way his father had turned paranoia into a plan. Leela leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, eyes shining. "You did it, Mijo." Ethan laughed once hollow. "I didn't do it, he did." Leela walked closer. "No, he set the table, you chose to sit." Ethan's burned palm throbbed. He looked down at it and realized something. The pain wasn't just pain, it was proof he'd acted. He'd reached into fire. He'd pulled something out. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight, and for once he hadn't wasted it trying to be liked. A soft sound came from the hallway. Ethan turned. The vet tech stood in the doorway, carrying Pickles in a small blanket like a burrito, one paw bandaged. Pickles' eyes were drowsy, but when it saw Ethan, its tail thumped weakly. Ethan's chest tightened. Pickles. The tech smiled gently. He kept whining until we brought him here. I figured you might need him. Ethan took Pickles carefully, feeling the dog's warm weight against his ribs. Pickles tucked its head under Ethan's chin again, the same way it had in the driveway, like a choice made twice. Leela sniffed, pretending not to. Look at that. The house finally got a heart. Ethan managed a small, real laugh. Pickles smelled like antiseptic now, with a faint trace of the attic dust still caught in its fur. Cleaned up, but still himself. Ethan looked around the study at the old desk, the lamp, the chair where his father used to sit and pretend he wasn't lonely. For the first time, Ethan didn't feel like the good son. He felt like a son who had survived. Stanwyck returned, face pale but composed. Ethan, based on the codicil and the evidence, you will likely assume control of the estate pending legal proceedings. At minimum, the foundation assets will be frozen until the investigation concludes. Ethan blinked. Control? Stanwyck nodded. Yes. Ethan's stomach churned, not with greed but with dread. Money wasn't the prize. The prize was what money could reveal and what it could destroy. He looked at Leela. What do I do? Leela lifted her chin. You do what you already did tonight. Ethan frowned. What's that? She nodded toward Pickles. You take care of what needs taking care of. You don't let the loudest person in the room decide what's true. Ethan held Pickles tighter. The dog sighed, warm breath against his collarbone. Ethan's mind flashed to the grocery store, the declined card, Mason's grin, to the funeral whispers, to the letter, "You'll thank me later." He finally understood the cruelty behind it. His father hadn't meant later like comfort. He'd meant later like clarity. Later like the moment you stop confusing obedience with love. Ethan exhaled slowly. I'm not going to run the foundation like Dad did, Ethan said quietly. Stanwyck blinked. What do you mean? Ethan looked at the computer screen. The foundation ledger, the stolen money, the hollow charity used as decoration. I'm going to make it real, Ethan said. Mason's voice came from the doorway, raw. You're going to take everything from me. Ethan turned. Mason stood there, shoulders tense, eyes red-rimmed, not crying, not exactly. Something closer to rage starving for a target. Ethan's chest tightened anyway because Mason was still his brother. Ethan spoke carefully. I'm not taking it from you. Mason laughed bitterly. That's rich. Ethan nodded once. No, listen. I'm taking it away from the lie. Mason's eyes flickered, confused. Ethan took a breath. This house, Ethan said, voice steady, was built on performance, on looking perfect, on pretending pain doesn't count. He looked down at Pickles. But tonight the only thing that mattered was who showed up. Mason's jaw clenched. Ethan didn't soften the truth, but he didn't sharpen it either. You can keep living like you're entitled to love, Ethan said. Or you can learn how to earn trust. Mason flinched like the word earn was foreign. Ethan stepped closer, one slow step, careful, not threatening. I'm not your enemy, Ethan said, but I'm not your cover anymore. Mason's nostrils flared. He wanted to say something cruel. Then he didn't. He turned and walked away, footsteps heavy, like a man leaving a room he thought he owned. Later, After deputies and paperwork and the buyer's agent sputtering about contracts. After Kendra was escorted away with fury in her eyes and no control left, Ethan sat on the front steps of the mansion. The rain had stopped. The air smelled like wet earth and cold stone. The porch light hummed softly, and somewhere far off a siren wailed and faded. Pickles lay beside him, bandaged paw tucked under its chest, breathing slow and safe. Leela sat on the other side, handing Ethan a paper cup of lukewarm coffee that smelled like burnt hope. Ethan stared at the driveway, at the iron gates, at the place he'd spent his whole life trying to be worthy of. He whispered he could have just loved me. Leela's voice was gentle. He did, badly. Ethan let that land. Then he said, quieter, and I still don't know what to do with that. Leela nodded. You don't have to fix the past. Just don't repeat it. Ethan looked down at Pickles, who opened one sleepy eye and thumped its tail once. He had one last chance before the grandfather clock struck midnight. The phrase echoed in his mind, but now it felt different. Not like a threat, like a promise. Because he realized the last chance wasn't about inheritance. It was about identity. It was about the moment you choose care over control, truth over comfort, courage over being liked. Ethan scratched Pickles behind the ear. The dog's fur was soft there, warm from life. Ethan breathed in the night air. And for the first time in 5 years, he didn't feel empty. He felt awake. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. And inside the house, the grandfather clock, finished with its midnight judgment, kept ticking anyway. Not to threaten him, to remind him time keeps going. So can you.